another episode of Curious. I'm your host, Sharon Latimer Mosley. On today's show, we speak to spoken word performers Jacqueline Bavell and Judy Bavell. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thank you.
How are you today?
Thank you.
Fine, thanks.
Great.
First, I didn't realize you two were related.
Grew up in the same house.
Same parents.
That's so funny. So tell me a little bit about where you grew up.
Well, we grew up in the town of Greenburgh.
Oh.
Yes. And where we grew up was right on the borderline of two school districts. So relatives and friends went to the Greenburgh Central 7 schools, and we went to the Valhalla schools. So our social life was kind of incorporating those two school districts.
And we grew up in a community that included many African-American notables, or actually twin communities of Parkway Homes and Parkway Gardens. And some of the African-American notables that lived there as we were growing up were Moms Mabley, let's see, Cab Calloway, but he lived a few blocks over in the town of Greenburgh, but not in our immediate neighborhood.
Gordon Parks.
Gordon Parks, oh yes. Hazel Scott.
Oh.
One of the main actresses in Porgy and Bess, her daughter Nina Hepburn's a very good friend.
Oh.
Yeah, and what was musicians? What was
Cy Oliver.
Cy Oliver, who was a orchestra producer and writer, music writer. So we grew up in a very culturally rich area of African American families during the 50s and 60s and 70s.
So
80s.
Give me a feeling of what it was like to live in Greenburgh then.
Well, back then, it was wonderful. It still is pretty nice. But it was a post-World War II burgeoning community, although there were earlier developments that went back into the 1920s. So it's interesting to drive through there. You see little stucco cottages, and then you see 50s Cape Cods, and then you see 60s split level. And so it's a mixture of older and more contemporary home designs, but single family homes. And because of the time that they were developed, they sit on lots sometimes big enough to put two homes.
And I would just like to add, Lynn mentioned single family homes. Our communities were very family oriented, very strong in the image of intact families, where fathers went to work and sometimes mothers stayed home, but often mothers went out to work as well. So it was as I said before, it was a very culturally rich community, family-oriented, religious-based, strong religious-based, and there were a lot of young people. We grew up in a baby boomer community, so to speak, and there were a lot of young people our age, who ranged from the early baby boomers to the late baby boomers. And our community, our home was like the community center at the time. We didn't have a park there. There is a park there now, Travis Hill Park, but when we were growing up, our backyard was the park because our parents would rather have our friends come in and hang out at our house, socialize at our house, play badminton, volleyball, backgammon on the back porch, and checkers and chess, and play 45s and music at the time. They would rather have our friends gather around our home than to just have no place for young people to go. That was the kind of family we grew up in. Our parents were our biological parents, but they had taken in over 100 children through foster care. And so we were always around a lot of young people.
And the neighborhood in Parkway Homes, or is it Parkway Homes? What's the difference between Parkway Homes and Greenburgh?
It's in the town of Greenburgh.
It's in the town.
Parkway Homes, Parkway Gardens are part of the town of Greenburgh. Town of Greenburgh is huge. There are approximately 90,000 residents in the town of Greenburgh, and there are approximately 45,000 in what's considered incorporated Greenburgh. Incorporated Greenburgh includes the villages, okay, of Ardsley, Dobbs Ferry, Elmsford, Hastings, Irvington, and Tarrytown.
Oh,
And
I
then
didn't know that.
unincorporated Greenburgh includes that area outside of the villages. But Parkway Homes, Parkway Gardens, Windover, Juniper Hill are all part of the fairgrounds area, Manhattan Avenue, Orchard Hill are all considered part of Fairview, which sits in the town of Greenburgh.
Were these homes mostly, in Parkway Homes, were they mostly African Americans who lived there?
It was a neighborhood in transition in the post-World War II period, and it stabilized as predominantly African American. And now it's in transition again because people age out and
that's
die
what
off.
my husband's
and the housing
grandparents.
stock becomes, in accordance with the way the economy is operating, becomes available to another set of newcomers. And sometimes the houses are just kind of refurbished as is. Sometimes they're added on to. And so, but the new neighbors are very diligent and dependable in terms of keeping the quality of life, the aesthetics. So while it's in transition ethnically and culturally, it's stable in terms of a place that you would enjoy having a backyard barbecue. And the school district is relatively small, Valhalla. And so
Very, very small.
yes, so new families look for that quality of school district.
And keeping some suburbia.
And I just want to mention that the neighboring school district, Greenburgh Central 7, is also an excellent school district. And it's important to mention that.
Okay.
Just a little bit bigger,
Sure.
but still
Yeah,
very
a little bit
high
bigger.
quality.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we met at the Ethical Cafe, and it was during your show, 400 Years of...
African American music history.
Yes. And could you tell me a little bit about how that program came together? I want to know how it came together, and what is it like working with your sister? I love my sister, but I don't know if I could do a show with my sister.
Well, to tell you the truth, the upcoming presenter for this weekend was originally scheduled for that date, and because she is a sculptress and a fairly high-profile artist, her life evolved in such a way that she couldn't keep the date. So we have been working with
And her
musicians.
name is?
Pardon?
Her name?
Vinnie Bagwell, premier sculptress of African American historical figures. Anyway, we work with musicians. We've been doing different kinds of events that involve spoken word, and adding a little bit of jazz for background music has enabled us to work on a consistent basis with musicians. One grew up with us. He's a jazz, contemporary music pianist and vocalist with a beautiful voice. I think you heard him, Joe Boykin.
Yes.
And then the Lester Harper Trio, we have been doing spoken word with them. So I think...
How do you, let me interrupt you. So how do you put the show together?
Well,
Now,
that's what I was getting into.
Okay, so you do the spoken word, but how do the musicians come in? And how do they do their part? Is it put together like a jazz composition, you know, where one feeds off the other, or how does that work?
Well, I was talking to the namesake of the Lester Harper Trio. He's a bass player. And I said, we should do 400 years of African American music history. And so that conversation turned into planning. On a regular basis, we've been working together for a couple of years. I'll come up with some sample pieces of spoken word, give them to him to look at. He then comes up with different kinds of music to play behind the spoken word. So between Judy and I and the musicians, we just kind of evolved in a planning way to come up with that combination. And then we did lots and lots of research on the history of musical trends in American society that illuminated the African American contribution to music. We really tried to touch on the cross-pollination because it's been tremendous, but there was so much. It would take maybe two or three a series of two or three to cover all of that. So there was so much information on the African American contribution to music in America that we kind of concentrated on that.
So I would like to go back a little bit, if I can, just to give a little bit of a history on how we evolved to this point. Maybe last year this time, my sister and I were talking about the fact that 2019 represented the 400th year of the first arrival of African Americans as enslaved individuals in this country. Now, history tells us that people from Africa have visited the shores of the Americas way before that time as early explorers. However, 1619 marked the date of the first arrival of Africans being brought here as enslaved individuals. So I said, you know, we should do something to celebrate and to honor our history. And so I wrote a proposal. At that time, I was a member of the African American Advisory Board for the County of Westchester, and I wrote a proposal to do a series of events. We brought a large committee of people together, and at some point, the committee, some of the members of that committee decided to organize their own events, and we continued under the title of the 400 Years Project hyphen a countywide collaborative. And so we've been doing a lot of work. I just want to mention some of the partner organizations, and then Lynn may will probably pick up with the Ethical Culture Society. So we started out, we currently are still in partnership with the Westchester Library System, the Ethical Culture Society of Westchester, the Greenberg African American Historical Alliance Incorporated.
What is that? I've never heard of that.
It's a non-for-profit organization. It's a non-for-profit organization that was founded a few years ago in support of a local resident who, that's a committee. We put together a book called Our Roots Run Deep, and it's a coffee table book documenting through pictures the history of the African American community in Greenberg. So you may have seen one on White Plains, on Yonkers.
One on White Plains.
Okay, so the publisher is Harold Isanasan.
Yes, I know Harold.
Okay, and
trying to get Harold on the show.
But we put together a committee of individuals to help him produce this book, of individuals who were able to go into their attics and bring out pictures of individuals who were able to bring forth stories based on fact and history of the communities. So, and then I just want to also mention the Historical Hudson Valley, Westchester County Archives, African American Men of Westchester, the Martin Luther King Library, which is housed in the Slater Center. So we represent a countywide group of individuals who have come together to bring this series of events, of which the one that you visited, that you attended, was one. And Lynn will talk about some of the upcoming events, and then I hope to have a little more time to talk about October 27th at the Greenberg Public Library, because we will be doing dramatic reading, retelling through actual slave narratives from a book written by a Westchester resident, Noel Ray, and the book is called The Great Stain.
This will probably air after that, but
okay.
Well, maybe you could come in and do a sample of it.
Hopefully you'll come. Hopefully you'll come.
It's going to be done on the 27th.
Right, the
Yeah.
27th of
Yeah.
October.
Okay.
So we were still talking about the event that you coordinated and the musicians and the richness of that event.
I wanted to give you an opportunity because we're already 15 minutes in, and I want to give you an opportunity to read some of your pieces if you have pieces that you would like to present, either one from the wonderful show that I attended. That was pretty amazing. I learned a lot of things. There was African drumming, there was jazz music, there was spoken word. So if you would give an example to the audience of some of your favorite pieces, one or two.
Okay. I like to give honor and acknowledgement in terms of the oral tradition to the roots of it. This is called Before the Preacher, and it introduces the idea of the griot.
And what is a griot?
The griot is the person, and they usually travel in ones, twos, or threes from village to village in the African culture and community. Their life work is to study and to memorize genealogy and tribal histories, and they rotate and give communities their history. That's how, in the Roots story, Alex Haley discovered the origin, the geographical origin of his American ancestor, Kunta Kinte, through the oral tradition of his elders here through the generations, passing on what they remembered, and then finding where his ancestor originated. The griots visited the village and told the exact same story that he had heard from his elders that were passed on over generations. So that's the significance of the griot.
Thank you.
Before the preacher was the griot, master of spoken word. Current events and history were chanted in mantras, composed to inform and educate family, clan, and village lineage. Message from the gods of heaven and earth, defining how to live in peace and harmony with Mother Nature, Father Time, your fellow woman, fellow man, your elders, and everybody's child. Poetry, chant, and mystery, designed to make you understand all is in divine order, even the drifting sands. And by, when the morning comes, we will understand it better by and by.
Now that last line was taken from a Negro spiritual. Now, the right next in significance, historical and cultural significance to the oral tradition is the drum. And I've worked with some master drummers that are indigenous to Westchester over the years. Abishai Ben Rubin is one of the main ones, and who hails out of Mount Vernon. I think you saw him when you came to that event.
I think he has a healing group.
Yes, and so this is the tribute to the drum. The drum speaks, and I hear the echo of calls from the past. Ancestors speaking in Yoruba, Mende, Ibu, Wolof, Fanti, Ashanti, Swahili, and Ga. Calls from the Congo, Gold Coast, and Gambia, sending us knowledge on how to become great musicians, great speakers, and leaders, historians, scholars, singers of prophecy, singers of song. The drum speaks, and I hear rhythms in beatboxes, trumpets, bass fiddle, and flutes. Duke Ellington, Ramsey Lewis, Billy Taylor, and George Duke. Keyboard, saxophone, slide, trombone, and guitar. I hear rhythms in rappers, poets, griots, and folklore. The drum speaks. We hear old songs and praise dance, celebrating lamba, manjani, samba, and chevichung. Those are all dances. Secrets our ancestors told can be heard in the drum. Listen closely. It's speaking to you. The drum speaking to me.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, ladies. That's so wonderful.
Thank you.
Now, I would like to get to the process. Now, when you're doing your performing, do you either one of you get nervous, and how do you deal with that?
Well, we both have theater background.
Oh.
I was a member of Barbara Ann Teer's National Black Theater in Harlem for about a decade in the 80s. She was a member of a theater group in Rochester, and I saw her play a major role in classic black theater like The River Niger. So I'll let her tell you about that. But that's where the nerves get worked out in the experience of getting on stage in front of audiences. And once the nerves get worked out, then it becomes an absolute heyday to get up in front of an audience.
But how do you work out that, that anxiousness, that, am I going to forget something, or things like that? Would you say?
I would just say that first, you have to make the piece your friend. You have to get to know it, talk to it, let it talk to you. And I remember several years ago, even when I was still living in Rochester, I would come home and my sister would take me to National Black Theater where she was taking classes. And I recall taking a workshop once with an actor from the 50s. His name was Hal DeWint, and he was a contemporary of Sidney Poitier and Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee. And I just recall him saying, when you are acting, you are not up there or on stage or someplace to act. So you are recreating a moment in life for your audience. So that gave me a whole paradigm shift, so to speak, about performing. It's not really acting, it's recreating a moment in life. Because the audience knows when you are believable and not believable. Okay?
They certainly do.
Yeah. And so once you feel you know the piece, you've made friends with it, you feel comfortable about it, then you can enjoy yourself. It becomes very enjoyable. Yes.
Okay, so we only have a few minutes left, and I just want to get your advice. Okay, so if you're a retiree or an over 50 person, now I hope I'm not insulting anyone
No, not
by
at
saying
all.
an over 50 person, what advice would you give them if, say, for example, you were an artist 30 years ago and now you're retired, or maybe you're a professional in your own right, in your job, you could do with your eyes closed, and you want to do art now, you want to go back to art. What would you recommend? What advice would you ladies give?
Well, first of all, I am very joyously retired, well over 50, and the only thing that worries me is maintaining vitality and a semblance of youthful looks.
You're doing pretty good.
Thank you. But anyway, it was a little bit of a conflict for me because I was a social worker, that's, professional and decorum and all of that. While I was working and exploring the arts, I would take visual and performing arts workshops and classes. How I reconciled it was that I was working with children and adolescents, so I would use the arts that I was learning to demonstrate and teach them so that their ability to self-express could be enhanced and their ability to problem solve could be enhanced. But so I eventually got comfortable with the fact that the two are not mutually exclusive, arts and professional life. But my advice to anyone who is interested, curious, inclined, or has a background, Alberta Hunter was a performer in the 20s and 30s left and had a life as a nurse, came back in her 80s and became a performer again. The arts are very validating and affirming. It allows us to express ourselves and to problem solve in abstract ways, whether it be visual arts, and we can just explore. We don't have to be an expert at it. We can explore through taking arts classes.
Right.
Or before I started taking classes, I would just pick up art supplies and bring them home and try to experiment with drawing and painting. So I highly, highly recommend for anyone that has the slightest notion, no matter what stage of adulthood or stage of life they're in. And I used to say to parents, have some art supplies in the house for the children.
I always do.
So I would like to add to that, as a former literacy coach in New York City schools, I would say read to children and breathe life into that book. As you are reading, use your voice to create a picture of the words, of the scene, of what's going on. And just in practicing reading to children and creating a vision for your listener of that image, you'll just find yourself, just kind of, being a part of that scene. And take workshops. And join a theater group. It's so much
theater group
fun.
Over 50?
Oh, absolutely.
Where are these places?
In real life, there are many people over 50, right? So theater, like I said, it's recreating life. Okay?
That's true.
So
That's
it's
true.
when you join a theater group, there's going to be roles for people of every age, of every ethnicity, of every culture.
Well, we only have, I'm getting the wrap it up sign. I want to thank you ladies for joining us tonight, Lynn
My pleasure.
and Judy.
My pleasure as well.
I greatly enjoyed our talk. And I'm going to put the information at the end of the show where you can see these wonderful ladies perform or get in touch with them if you'd like them to perform at your event or at schools. Do you do schools or their school or schools? Thank you very much and good night.